Welcome to the Beyond Dimensional podcast. We're your hosts, Liz and Lori. We're here to blend our spiritual experience with major curiosity and plenty of profanity, guiding you through ancient wisdom and modern practices. But listener, beware. We are foul-mouthed, opinionated, and no topic is off limits. So jump on your broomstick, bitches. We're going Beyond Dimensional. Welcome back, bitches and witches. We are your hosts of the Beyond Dimensional podcast. I am Liz.
I'm Lori.
Hello. We are so excited to be back for another fabulous episode here. We are joined by a fascinating human being. Her name is Deva Neely. Deva is a grief coach, Reiki practitioner, and psychic medium whose intention is always to help people find peace, comfort, clarity, and to help them heal on their grief journey. But that's not where her story begins. While her background in teaching made her the perfect fit to educate her clients on making energetic shifts to relieve themselves of built-up grief, it's Deva's intense connection to the spiritual world that has us on the edge of our seats, and we will tell you why in a second. She is the host of her very own podcast called Good Grief, fabulous name, and she provides individual readings, packages, as well as energy clearing sessions. So let's open the floor now to our wonderful guest, Deva Neely. Deva, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited that you're here.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I've never had somebody introduce me as being on the edge of your seats, awaiting what I have to say.
With bated breath, we've been so excited to talk to you more. Well, we're stoked because our initial conversation just led us down these wonderfully beautiful rabbit holes with you, and we're so stoked to continue that conversation. So give us the deets, girl. How did your spiritual journey begin? Tell us about those first experiences.
Well, the earliest that I can remember is as a young child, and I remember having this girl in my playroom and having conversations with her, and we would play, and I knew her name was Rachel, but she said to me, well, if you get a cool name, so do I. So I'm Raquel. And, we sort of laughed about that. And I remember telling my mom about her. And I was explaining to my mother at 4 years old that while I was asleep, Raquel was awake in my dreams. And when Raquel was asleep, I was awake in her dreams. And I remember my mom's face vividly because her eyes got big and she just looked at me and says, oh, you have an imaginary friend. And I was like, imaginary? She's upstairs. What do you mean imaginary? And I don't think my mom knew how to process that information.
And sure. Can you imagine, Liz, can you imagine when you have some kid and they're like, hey, so let me tell you about so-and-so. You're like, get your ass to bed, knock it off.
No.
Right?
Yeah. I don't like talking to children in general. So having that conversation, I'd be running in the other direction.
Seriously, like turn off the fucking television and go to bed. Anyway, sorry, Deva, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. I don't know if my mom knew how to process that information. And my mom's always been pretty cool and pretty advanced for her time. And, so in her mind, I think it was just safer to say, oh, you had an imaginary friend. And so she was the one who was always with me, and she was the one to give me information. So I always knew things, and I didn't know how I knew them. And I had ghost encounters throughout my childhood. I didn't know how to explain that to people, so I just didn't, which I think caused some anxiety in me, as is often the case, because I didn't know who to tell or even what to tell them if I could tell them. But, my grandparents had a farmhouse that was extremely haunted. And I mean, even those in my family who weren't as capable as I was, all felt that there was definitely presence in that house. And
I've grown up on a farmhouse that wasn't haunted at some point. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the epitome of haunted homes.
It's the foundation of every horror movie ever.
For a reason.
Exactly.
Right, for a reason. And I don't know if people who don't have gifts, right, or aren't tapped in, because I think everybody has gifts,
Yeah.
but I don't know when they walk in, if it's like, I've been told to feel freaked out, so I feel freaked out.
Yeah.
Or if people are literally walking and they feel the energy shift and they're like, okay, what the hell is happening right now? But I think people feel that energy, whether they want to believe it or not, or acknowledge it or not, right?
Yes.
So I think old buildings, farmhouses, all that shit, it's so fascinating because it seems like those spirits and entities stay there. They don't fucking leave.
Yeah.
Like they don't move on. They just stay there. I don't know what it is. It's like a 1800s thing. I don't know. Anyway.
It is definitely, right? You can't deny the shift in energy when you go into a place like that. And I grew up in a very, very small town in southern Ontario that is also known for being one of the most haunted towns in Canada.
Amazing.
Right? The entire town is built of limestone on a river. It is the breeding ground for paranormal activity. And of course, I experienced a lot of it. And it's been through the years that, my experiences have been validated by other people who had similar or the same experiences in the same locations. So it's fascinating. And I have a friend who's a medium who had a TV show, and she went to one location in this town to do her TV show. And I had set it up with her because a friend of mine was the one who ran this art center. And it was formerly a school, and it had been a school for 150 years. And I had experiences in that building. So I said to my friend who was doing this TV show, I can't wait to see what your experience is and if it matches up. And it 100%, it was almost identical what she experienced and what I experienced throughout my childhood. So
I have to ask. So that was same experience with both of you understanding that you have spiritual gifts.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it like? What is your experience like versus someone who doesn't, who you're like, oh no, everyone had some understanding of what it is, but what's that spectrum like? So you grew up, like, let's talk about your farmhouse here. You are someone who's highly energetically connected, but the rest of your family, maybe not so much. So like, how did they experience things versus how you experienced things there?
Well, there was a spare room in my grandparents' house off to, like, on the east wing of the house, I guess, down the hallway where my grandparents' bedroom was, which was a divided staircase. So the rest of the house was towards the other side. So it was this spare room that very often sat alone. And there was a reason for that, because nobody wanted to go in that room. It felt wrong. It felt not, I don't want to say evil because I don't like using that word, but it felt very negative. And I had a lot of issues with that side of the house as well. And I know specifically that it was a very negative entity, and I didn't want to communicate with it. I didn't want to have experiences with it. And that was me being sensitive to it. The rest of the people in my family just avoided that room, but didn't know why. Everybody got a sense that there was it was off. And it was always freezing cold in that room, even in the dead of summer. And there was no air conditioning in that old farmhouse. So that room specifically was always cool.
Why do you think that is? Okay, rabbit hole. I don't know. Nobody's giving me this information when I'm communicating. Why is it fucking freezing? Why is there always a temperature change? Do you know? Have you ever had information about that?
What I understand is it's the shift in the alignment of those two realms.
Got it.
Coming together.
Got it.
There's a shift to cold. I mean, I don't know scientifically what that would be, and I know there are ghost hunters that have all these barometers to check those things, but it's definitely an indicator when there is a spirit around. Well, that spirit was around all the time because that room was always cold. And there were also negative things that happened in that room. My brother happened to be playing in that room, and a fire started in that room. And he was only 3, I think, at the time.
Wow.
And he was playing with a lighter. but he dropped the lighter and the bed lit on fire. There was about,
Oh my God.
it's pretty bad, but it's not the first fire in that farmhouse in 150 years. People died by fire in that house. And so just, how does a 3-year-old start a fire with a lighter? First of all, he didn't know how to use the mechanism well enough to do something like that. And even if he did light, like the flame did light, he dropped it. It would have gone out instantly the minute that trigger, he pulled his thumb off that trigger. So
Weird.
That is wild.
I don't know, one 3-year-old with a dexterity and intention to do that. So good on your brother if he actually was able to. But that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Wow.
So how did you know it was, outside of that, right? But initially, how did you know it was a negative entity? Like, I know that people, we can feel, you take sensitivities out of it, but like people can feel negative energy or like, when your stomach hurts or, you have that feeling. But how did you know, or did you ever find out really who was in that room? Why were they there? What was the deal? And I know we talked about a fire and, some death that occurred prior. Was that connected to this room as well?
I don't know if it's specifically in that room. All we know is that there was a fire and the house went up in flames. Where it started, I don't know. My gut tells me that it was around that room, and
Got it.
the messaging I get around that is that would have been the location, but there was no confirmation on that. But there was a man and his son that were killed. Now, I had communication with them. So I communicated with them in the house. They were the most prevalent spirit that came through to me, and I knew they were good. Where I got the sense of this negative entity in that room is the feeling was very, very different. And as a kid, I could decipher the difference because the hair on the back of my neck would stand up, right? I would get goosebumps and just this feeling of dread and the need to remove myself from that area, that it was almost like a warning sign, right? Danger, danger. And I did not want to communicate that. And if there's one thing I had always asked my spirit team to do, and I still do, is to protect me from those things. I've said I don't want to deal with the negative, but unfortunately you have to sort of do both. And so I do help people clear some of that from their house and from people I've experienced working with people who have an attachment as well that is quite scary and negative. So these aren't things I've opted to voluntarily want to be a part of, but I can't always pick and choose. At that time, I felt like I was being protected.
That's good. So you were 4 when you started kind of having these experiences or these feelings, these understandings of things around you. So what happened from childhood? Like, what did you always keep your gifts? Was it something that kind of developed or ebbed and flowed? Like, what was the transition for you into adulthood?
Well, there was a point where it kind of disappeared, and I don't know if that was just life got in the way. I think the first traumatic experience for me that really shook me was the death of my grandfather. I didn't believe he had died. And I wanted proof. I wanted proof. I still felt him with me, and I didn't know how to explain that. And so I wanted them to open the casket. And I had a meltdown because they wouldn't open the casket. I wanted verification that he was actually gone because he didn't feel gone to me. And it was the first time I had had a significant death in my own life. So not understanding that there was that connection still in death. He was still there with me. That's why I didn't believe he was gone. But everybody was telling me he was gone. And so that's where the confusion really started to happen for me. And I think it was in that traumatic time and then subsequent things that went awry in my family that I sort of became, I had to go into survival mode and just try and get through life at 9 years old, right? And it wasn't until many years, decades down the road, even though I still had intuitive hits, I still kind of knew things all throughout my teaching career. I always had students say things to me like, "Oh my gosh, how did you know that? Are you psychic?" And I would kind of laugh. I'm like, "No, maybe, I don't know."
Sorta, kinda.
Exactly. And it wasn't until another big traumatic moment in my life that had me reevaluate everything. And it was my brother's death. And that forced me to stop, and it forced me to look inwards, and it forced me to do work that I was trying to avoid doing on myself and on healing, um, and dealing with the grief of that, that it brought me back to that place. It was, I felt like it was kind of full circle. I was brought back to where it started. And literally, I ended up moving back to my hometown. And I remember I was doing some writing and I was talking about how we as a society, we don't take the time to just stop and look around and see what's happening around us, because oftentimes things are happening for us and we don't even take note of them. And this is how I explain to people when they're looking for signs from their loved one. Sometimes you have to stop and take a look around, because our loved ones are sitting there with signs going, hello, hello, I'm right here. And you're not looking, you're not seeing it, and it's right in front of you. And so in explaining that, I thought, I should take my own advice. And I was sitting in this little coffee shop and I sat back. I was at this same table I would always go to write. And I was sitting back, I took my latte and I looked out the window and I started to cry, because I didn't even realize instinctively I was sitting with a view of my childhood home right out the window. It was kitty corner to this cafe.
Wow.
And it didn't even occur to me until I thought, I need to look at my surroundings. And I looked around and I went, I am just naturally connected to that house. That is the house where I first connected to my guardian angel. That is where I explained to my mom quantum physics at 4 years old. That is where it all started for me. And here I was reconnecting with that. And I'm almost drawn to that house. I would love the opportunity to possibly buy that house again. And it's not a great house. It's in huge disrepair. But there's just something about it energetically that is in alignment with me that I would love to get back in there.
Yeah, mine's the East Wing.
No, that's not the farmhouse.
Oh, okay, I understand. I was like, oh, I don't know about that other side.
Although I would like to tackle that house as an adult now. I would like to go in there and have my psychic medium ways in there.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Walk in fully armed. Just be like, all right, you and me, let's go, entity.
Let's go. Yeah.
I want to go. I want to volunteer. I want to go to, I would love to see this, because even with the house, as you're talking about it, like I get all this information, right? And it's like, oh, I just love to see this place, because I can see it through you in the way that you're viewing it as you're talking about it at that time in your life. Does that make sense? Well, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't have to explain to you. You know how it goes. But the way that I see it through you today is different than the way it looks now, because you're seeing it at that age, that time in your life, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, when you talk about, the passing of your brother and kind of reconnecting with, these true gifts that you have, do you feel like he was the one that inspired that in multiple ways, so that he could really communicate with you at this level 100%. To really increase? Yeah. I love that. And I'd love to hear, like, what happened. Like when you left that moment and you're looking at that house and you're like, oh my God, I have this connection. And you're thinking about, your grandfather's past, your brother's past, like what happened after that?
Well, there was a lot of things that happened even shortly after he died that I couldn't explain, or that came at a time when I desperately needed them, because my brother died by suicide. And so as anybody who's experienced something like that, you're left with way more questions than you are answers. And even when you find answers, it just brings on more questions. So, there was a lot of stuff that was undone that I couldn't figure out. And I was trying to find those answers. I felt like I was desperate to find those answers. And I didn't know where to turn. And sometimes the those answers came to me in the oddest places through the oddest people. I remember being in a workshop thinking, I needed to do something for myself, and maybe this would help shift my mojo. I felt like, it had been 6 months after he had passed, and I was trying desperately to get back to what I thought was normal. And I went to this workshop on creating vision boards. So I was sitting in a room full of like a dozen strangers. I didn't know anybody. And the woman instructor who was explaining what the instructions were and what we were to do stopped midway through her instructions, turned to me and said, "Deva, your brother is right there over your left shoulder. And he's jumping up and down, and he is adamant that I point it out." And the feeling of shock that came over me, because she didn't know me, nobody else in the room knew me. I felt very vulnerable very quickly. And I just started to bawl because it was not anything that I had expected in that moment from that person that I didn't know in front of a room full of strangers. And so she came to me afterwards, and I didn't know her well. I had had one energy session with her, and she said, "He came to me during your session. I just didn't know how to bring it up." And she said to me, what do the train tracks? He keeps showing me train tracks. And I started to bawl again because my brother chose to die lying down in front of a train. And I should have said trigger warning there, just in case for people. So I'm sorry. But it was all very surreal to me in that moment that she was definitely confirming that my brother was still with me, even though instinctually I knew it. And so she goes, "I don't normally like to be invasive that way, but he was adamant." Like she said, it was so distracting for me. And I thanked her for doing it, that it really meant a lot to me. And so when I sat down to do my vision board and to get to work, I just kind of flipped through a magazine, and I flipped it open. And on this page, it says, "I love my brother."
Aww.
Out of the stack of magazines that were on the table, and the one I grabbed and randomly flipped to a page, that was the page that was there. And so that was really the first confirmation in knowing that he was still with me. And so I started to communicate with him, and I started to talk to him. And, I still was seeking answers and stuff, but I felt at least more connected in that way. And then he started talking back. And then literally it was talking in my ear, or shouting in my ear, because my brother was a jackass in life. He was a prankster.
He's like, "Yeah, thanks."
Why would that change, right? It's like,
well, that's exactly it. He's like, "Why would I be different, right? What did you expect?" And so he was very adamantly trying to get my attention by yelling in my ear every night. And it would startle me awake, even though I wasn't quite asleep, but I wasn't fully awake. And it just happened so many times, it stopped being a coincidence. And then I started to scold him. I'm like, "Well, if you're going to talk to me, at least do it at normal hours."
Right? And, you got to teach them.
Right? I needed to set boundaries. And
they have no concept of time.
No, and they don't. And even while he was living, he wouldn't have cared anyway. I mean, there were multiple times he would call me at 2:00 in the morning with some information to tell me or something exciting to tell me. I'm like, "Dude, do you know what time it is?" So again, why would he be different in spirit? Right. And so that started me hearing spirits. And we were ghost hunting one night at a theater in my hometown, and had a great experience. There's lots of activity in this very old theater. And it was that night when I went to go to sleep that it wasn't just my brother I heard. There was about 12 other voices coming at me. And I remember sitting up, like bolt upright in bed, going, that's different. Okay. Nice to meet you. Like, what do you think at that point? And so it was then that, it kind of opened the floodgates, so to speak. And then I started just meditating and sitting and listening and connecting again to my spirit team. And it was a process, but it was all still there, and it all came back to me. And it's a practice for a reason, right? And things are forever shifting. I used to hear them, and occasionally I get audible messages, but now spirit communicates with me through images. I see things.
Mm-hmm.
They show me like a picture. And so that shifted. I find like it's forever shifting, or something will come to me. I'm like, oh, that's new. It's like I'm seeing somebody's past life. I'm like, I don't have that experience much. Or somebody's animal will come through, and I know there are mediums who specifically deal with animals, and I think it's fascinating. But that doesn't happen to me often. So when it does, I'm like, oh, interesting. Okay, that's new.
I remember asking you this question, but now I don't remember the answer. So when you hear, do you literally hear, or is it download hearing?
Initially, it felt like I was literally hearing, because it was my brother's voice. Now, if I hear anything, it's almost like it's my voice, but it's not me speaking, if that makes sense.
Got it. Yes. I struggle with that because, and I shared this with you, and my mom and I talk about this all the time. I don't literally hear, and I don't literally see. Everything is in my mind. As where my mom hears literally and sees literally. And I'm like, I don't know how you handle that. That would drive me insane. At least the crazy shit that comes out, I can kind of keep it enclosed in my own wacky brain, other than walking around going, okay, what am I seeing? What am I hearing? Who's talking to me? I keep my crazy to myself a little bit that way. But
every time someone brings this up, I always am picturing Whoopi Goldberg walking around in Ghost. Every time, without fail. She's sitting at the table, she hears someone, she's like, what the fuck is that? And like, she's walking around New York City, like dodging ghosts that she can't actually see, but she's just like hearing them all, and she's like freaking out. That is 100% like the image I had of Deva when you were talking about it. And then Laura, we were talking about your mom, same thing. It's just like, how could you possibly comprehend that without thinking, oh, I'm schizophrenic, like I have 18 personalities, like what do I do now? But it's wild, like crazy to think that. So actually on that point, Laura, so Deva, are you the only person in your family with these kinds of gifts?
They would say yes. I don't think so. There are things, and I'm learning even more as I talk to some extended family as well, and some of the rituals they do in like putting salt around somebody's house as protection. And I was like, oh, hold on a minute. We come from a long line of witches, is what I'm hearing, right? Like there's that sense. My mom's godmother, who is also kind of like my great aunt, she used to do the spell for what in Italian is called malocchio, evil eye. And she removed that curse for people.
Wow.
And I didn't think anything of it.
Yeah.
Because she did it for me. We swore I was cursed.
Yeah, there's like religious or superstition or other cultural kind of aspects you could kind of explain away. But like,
or just was, right? You just, okay, yeah. Because malocchio in for Italians, that's a big deal. And that's why you see people wearing the Eye of Horus, and it's a big thing, right? And the concept of putting a curse on somebody. But it's so not Italian Catholic, which is also,
right.
It's sort of like this dichotomy. And so I didn't put two and two together. And it wasn't until recently, in having this conversation with some of my cousins, and I was thinking, well, holy heck. Look at that. We have a long line of people who've sort of been intuitive, just didn't know how to label it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the salt around the house, like, you're not trying to flavor the soil. Like, that is clearly a spiritual,
something's going on,
protection spell situation.
Definitely.
Like nobody. Yeah, if you're wearing garlic and holding a cross, like it's not like that's not a normal run of the mill thing to do.
Wait, I do that all the time. What are you talking about?
What do you mean?
I just run around. I mean, come on, why not?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, imagine.
Okay, but before we forget, because we could keep Deva on this show for 9 years, and we definitely are going to have to ask her to come back because she has so many amazing stories.
Yeah.
But you have to tell everybody about Raquel,
So,
if you don't mind.
yeah, I would love to. So, as I previously said, my guardian angel is Raquel, Rachel, but fancy name Raquel because I'm Deva. She has to be special too, as she very adamantly told
Love
me as
that.
a child. I grew up fascinated by twins. I was drawn to them. I was curious about them. I felt if I were to have children, they would be twins. I came from a family that had twins in the line, so it was possible. But I was always fascinated by twins. And it wasn't until, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I was at my mom's house and I was getting something to drink. She had a friend over and was talking to her. I was half paying attention and I heard her say something about when she was pregnant with me and the doctor heard 2 heartbeats. And I was like, wait, what? And she goes, you knew
Oh my
that.
gosh.
I'm like, no, I didn't. She goes, oh. She goes, yeah. She said, you're a twin. The doctor heard 2 heartbeats, and I was freaking out because I didn't know how to have one baby, let alone having two. And, what do I do with that? I was like, you never told me that. And all of a sudden, everything in my life made sense. It explained my obsession with twins. It explained that I felt this connection to twins, that I felt like I would have twins. Like all these things came to me. And when I made the connection, and then I thought, well, wait a second, Raquel looked like me, talked like me. It was like looking in a mirror, right? And I explained that to my mom at 4 years old. She looks like me, she talks like me, her name's Rachel, but she says if I get a fancy name, her name, she gets one too. And
Oh my gosh.
so all of a sudden this came to me. And when I said to Raquel, are you? She said, yes. I'm like, you didn't tell me? She goes, it wasn't.
That is wild.
Right? Of all the conversations, you never happen to want to mention that that's probably important.
You think? Yeah.
Just so crazy.
Yeah.
So wild. So, okay, the last question we want to leave you with is, let's say somebody, me, not me, was, skeptical. They were like, sure, it's your twin, whatever. What do you say to people who are like, okay, Deva, like, that's nice, but you're full of shit essentially, and I don't believe a damn thing you're saying, and go get a life. How do you handle those conversations?
I just simply say it's not for me to convince you. It's not my job to convince you. I'm just here to deliver a message. What you do with that message is totally up to you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to argue with people. It's not worth the energy. And,
Totally.
I have people who, they think it's a scam or they think it's whatever. However, I mean, first of all, people are entitled to their opinion. That's okay. They can believe what they want to believe because I think they're just not at the same level of consciousness. They'll be shown at some point, right? But it's not for me to show it to them. It doesn't matter what I say, they're not going to believe it. And they're not in a mindset to is when I have those people who are skeptical and I can just be genuine and relay messages, and that shifts their perception right there because I know things that I shouldn't know, or I give them information that they weren't expecting, and I again shouldn't know that information. And my stepfather was one of those people, and he didn't believe, he didn't believe in ghosts, and it didn't matter what I said, he just didn't believe it. And out of the blue, he asked me if I would do a reading for him. And I was kind of like, why?
Wow.
Like,
Yeah.
I
What?
thought you didn't believe. He goes, well, I don't. I'm like,
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
He wanted to connect with his mom and his sister. And, so I explained to him, I said, we can try. I said, I find it harder to do people like to do readings for people I know because I'm biased and I question the messages that come. Lori, you're the same.
Yep.
But I didn't know his sister at all. I never met her. She died prior to him being in our lives. And his mom I knew, but I didn't know in depth. And so I did a reading for him. So it ended up with him in tears. And he said to my mom later, Deva knew things about my sister that I've never told anybody.
Wow.
Yep. And that's where the evidence is, right? Like when we talk about, and I say this so many times, Liz is going to be sick of me repeating, and I probably say this on every freaking podcast, but it's like when people say you're full of shit, you have no idea, and then you tell them something there's absolutely no way you could have known, that's evident. To me, that's where I can get behind it and not just think I'm a nut job, is because I can tell people something and I'm like, how the fuck would I have this information? I literally just met you for the first time ever. And I can tell you what happened. Or when you tell somebody something and they have no idea what you're talking about, they have to go talk to other people, their other relatives, and then they're like, oh my God, my mom knew. And it's like, okay, well, obviously we're not making it up, right? Like we can't just create this stuff. But I love that. And when people question me, I'm like, fuck off. I don't care. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not here to impress you, take it or not. I don't give a shit.
Yep.
Do what you want. But don't ask me to read you, because if you're going to be a skeptic and like prove it to me and I'm going to have you read me so you can prove, I'm not interested in that. I won't do it. I don't care. But anyway, I think it's such a great thing that you do. And I love that, you focus on in your practice, healing people and that grief, because there's a lot of healing that comes from connecting people to those they've lost and have questions about, right? It's one thing when you lose someone who was dying and you had time with them and they're 99 years old. Not that that's easy, right? But that's so different than losing someone tragically. Yes. Or meeting your parent, that you never knew, knowing them for a few months, then they die, right? It's so very different. It's not easy work. It's a lot of emotional connection and energy to be able to do that.
And I mean, you can't help but get emotionally involved. And I find when we're relaying messages from spirit, they also allow us to feel what they're feeling or feel what they felt at that time, right? So sometimes I'm explaining how somebody died because of what they're making me feel. And that's not fun. And that's also not great. Like it's not information I enjoy giving, but sometimes they need answers to find closure. It's emotionally taxing, right? And that's why I don't like doing readings back to back. I need some time in between. I need to clear and cleanse. And, I need to make sure that I'm setting boundaries for myself to make sure that I'm okay. I don't want to, as an empath as well, you take on other people's things. Like I remember something stuck with me for a long time because a father came through with these messages for his children, and just the feeling that he evoked, this desperation of wanting them to know and understand that he will never leave them, that even though he won't be walking them down the aisle or he won't be at graduation, he will be. He may not be there physically, but he will definitely be there. And just this sense of overwhelming sadness from him in desperation and wanting his kids to know that I carried that with me for a few days. That one took a while to shake off.
Wow, that's super powerful. Ugh, Deva, you are just so wonderfully interesting in what you do, and clearly such a caring and kind individual. But we're so happy to have had you. I want to let anyone listening know that Deva is not only just taking people in as clients, but she also has her podcast called Good Grief and a free Facebook group called Grief Relief, which I love your names, by the way. You're fabulous. We are just so happy that we got to learn more about you and your whole journey to where you've become this incredible human being. All of her links will be in the show notes. We're excited to have you back soon.
Thank you. I would love it.
Everybody have a wonderful day. We will see you back at the Beyond Dimensional podcast soon.
Thanks, Deva. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Beyond Dimensional podcast. To our knowledge, no witches, aliens, ghosts, or other entities were harmed in this dimension or any others during the recording of this episode. If you enjoyed Beyond Dimensional, subscribe wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Beyond Dimensional Podcast. See you next time, bitches.